the last installment of the Religious Institute's summer webinar series on religious resistance and reproductive justice. I'm Kentina Washington Leaphart, and I am the Director of Programs for Reproductive Justice and Sexuality Education at the Religious Institute. And I'm so grateful to be able to introduce you to today's webinar facilitator, Minister Essence Jackson, who's joining us from Memphis, Tennessee. And she is the interim interfaith and outreach coordinator at Sister Reach, which is a Black woman-led reproductive justice organization that does some really, really great work in Memphis and across the state of Tennessee and really across the country around reproductive justice, particularly related to Black women and Black women's lives. And so we are so grateful to have Essence here. She's got a wonderful background in organizing and justice and advocacy work, as well as ministry work and the intersection of both of those aspects of her interests and vocations in her life. And so she is going to be sharing with us today some of the great work that Sister Reach has been doing and continues to do around religious education and helping congregations figure out how to integrate conversations around reproductive justice in their religious education curriculums within the congregational context, so Bible studies, small groups, etc. So I'm going to turn it over to Essence, who's going to go through her presentation. If you have questions, please put your questions in the chat box that's there on your GoToWebinar control panel there. You can also live tweet with the hashtag RJWebinars, so please do that, and also include the Religious Institute's Twitter handle in that as well. And so in the meantime, I'd love to turn this over to Essence and have her start her presentation. Thanks, Essence.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Excuse me, and I'm so glad that I have this opportunity to share just some of the work that we are doing here at Sister Reach around education, religious education, as education is one of our tenets of how it is that we do our work. And so I am glad to share that with you all. Give me just a second. All right, and so this is, like she said, this is some of the work that we do here at Sister Reach around religious ed and some of the things that we use to kind of allow people to kind of see themselves fully in the text. If you'd like, if you're on Twitter, please feel free to follow me. My handle is at the bottom of the screen, as well as Sister Reach's handle. So feel free to, in addition, using the hashtag RJWebinars with an S, be sure to add myself as well as Sister Reach, and follow Sister Reach on Facebook and Twitter while you're at it. All right, so some of the things that we'll be covering. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Sister Reach, the work that we're doing here in Tennessee. Also, we're going to go kind of this reproductive justice refresher just to kind of give an idea of what reproductive justice is for the people that are listening on the call. I'm going to talk about the intersection of biblical scripture and RJ, what that means, and then I'm going to give you a couple of tools that we use here at Sister Reach, particularly within our interfaith department, to address resistance and reproductive justice, and just kind of give you some things to kind of show you how to integrate those conversations. Also going to talk about our Educate and Advocate curricula that we just released a few months ago, and then I will open the floor to any questions that you may have. So who is Sister Reach? We are the only reproductive justice organization in the state of Tennessee. We're one of the few in the country, but we are the only one here in Tennessee. And our focus is women and girls of color, poor women, rural women, which includes gender non-conforming individuals and their families, which includes men and boys. Some of our work includes is centered around reproductive and sexual health education and advocacy. as well as interfaith and outreach advocacy. And so some of the work that we have is we have a group called, we call them our youth ambassadors, Sister Reach Youth Ambassadors. We do Vacation Body School, which is our sex education that we offer for 6th through 12th grade in the context of community and in spaces of faith. We also do a sex ed 101 for adults. We do a lot of outreach and mobilization, a culture change work which is mainly centered and based in our interfaith department. We do many trainings and workshops. In addition to that, we do a RJ 101 and a few other trainings. We also, our political kind of outreach or arm is our CSC for TN, which is Comprehensive Sex Ed for Tennessee. That's our policy outreach work that we center around. As some of you may be aware, if you're in Tennessee, you know that we are unable to offer comprehensive sexual education in our school systems, and there's a heavy penalty for that. And so that's one of our big campaigns that we're pushing for, is to get that law changed. We do voter registration and education, community conversations, Midwives and Warriors Bible Study, which is, you're going to get a kind of a piece of that in the activity that I give. And then we have our Educate and Advocate curricula that centers just a training curricula that talks about reproductive justice and faith. So what is reproductive justice? It is a human rights framework. And instead of just kind of focusing on a single issue, we look at the person's entire reproductive experience and their living circumstances. It's not a synonym for pro-choice or pro-rights. It focuses, RJ focuses on access, because we recognize that individuals can't make a choice if they have no access. It is led by women of color, supporting their leadership, centered in grassroots organizing, oppression and institutional analysis, and rooted in the recognition of the histories of reproductive oppression and abuses in communities of color. So as you can see here, you can see that it is not, RJ is not focused singularly on our reproductive rights, reproductive health, reproductive freedom, or choice, but we speak to the whole person. And so we found that the danger of single issue organizing or thinking in regard to the lives of people of color is very, very dangerous. We found that out because people don't lead single issue lives. There are multiple circumstances that kind of aid in the systems of oppression in our communities. And so reproductive justice was crafted with the most marginalized in mind, which is why here at Sister Reach, we do this work with a lens or a foundation of a womanist liberation theology. All right. And so these are the tenets of reproductive justice. So it's a human rights framework that says that all women have the choice to decide if and when she will have a baby and the conditions under which she will have that child. Decide if she will not have a baby and what are her options for either preventing or ending a pregnancy. 3, the ability to parent the children she already has with the necessary social support in a safe environment in healthy communities and without fear of violence from individuals or societal or government violence. And then this last one is one that Sister Reach has just added, the freedom to celebrate spirituality and sexuality. And so that's kind of our framework. And so as we continue this call, this webinar, continue to keep these things in mind as we continue to do this. And so this intersection of reproductive justice and biblical faith. And so biblical text, the focus of doing ministry through an RJ lens is centering the lived experiences of the people in the pews and connecting those real stories to biblical text and examples that resonate within them. So if we think about some of those things, we can think about Mary, the mother of Jesus, and talking about how she was a teen parent and centering that around the lack of or the inability to offer comprehensive sex ed within our school system here in Tennessee, or even beyond that, the stigma that is presented around teen parents, teen pregnancy and teen parents. We think about the woman with the issue of blood who still to this day remains nameless, right? And so the ability to access health care, right? This woman who had spent all that she had over 12 years. So then there's the economic issue in addition to the healthcare issue. So how do we connect those issues with this particular text? Also thinking about thinking about Dinah, right, and the situation of how she was raped, and thinking about this perverse rape culture in our communities and in our society. Those are just a few, but if we, continue to look through the biblical text, we can find other examples of stories in the Bible that we can connect to current issues to help people see the relationship between the two. And so in doing this, we learn and we know that learning is communal. So this approach takes a bottom-up approach instead of a top-down. And then so the next approaches that I'm going to introduce in this call will allow for you and your faith communities to place what you have learned or are learning around RJ, along with the community's lived experience, to begin to make connections through the scripture. And which, if we think about that, that is there an act of resistance in and of itself, especially for marginalized and oppressed groups. And so it allows individuals to really see themselves in the text versus having to disregard and kind of disown who they've been and take on what's perceived to be in the text. Renita Weems, I was reading and researching this, and so Renita Weems talked about this in her work inside of Sony the Road We Tried, called Reading Her Way Through the Struggle. And as it relates to, she was talking about African American women, but if we take that off to say all women, as how we see ourselves in the biblical text. And so for far too long, she says that women have been forced to renounce their experience of reality, to spend her understanding of life, and waive her right to her own values, so that she may, without encumbrances, without any sort of barriers, can surrender herself to the experiences, worldview, values, and assumptions embedded in the word. And so RJ, this intersection of reproductive justice and the biblical text allows one to not have to do that, but to be able to be their full selves, their whole complete self, and see themselves in the biblical text. And so for many of the people we serve, there is no talking of faith without discussion of the biblical text, or the Bible, whichever you call it. For the Bible, the biblical text is centered in one's faith experience. So then the question becomes, how do we then hold the tension between the authority of the text and the need for reproductive justice? And that comes through a change of perspective. And so this constant belief that movements for reproductive health, rights, and justice are kind of antithetical to faith or against faith, to faith traditions, is rooted in a view that faith traditions and sacred texts only hold one message for all people throughout eternity. And so for a more productive conversation that seeks to honor the text while also seeking liberation is the view of sacred text as a narrative arc that bends towards justice. We have to approach the text with understanding that the entire text functions in our lives to communicate the voice of God through our journey, for our journey. And so we have to, in order to activate this change in perspective, we have to break down and build some habits. And so we got to break down some habits of searching for brief scriptural one-liners as answers to every situation. Assuming that everything in the text is prescriptive or set for all time. One kind of interpretation is the end-all, be-all, and that's it. Shying away from different translations of the text and ignoring parts of the text that don't support our own understanding of faith. And so we must, in that, build some habits of accounting for the context into which the text was written when we are interpreting, acknowledging human frailty involved in the writing and the canonic development of the text. searching out the stories that are problematic for you and being courageous in stating why, searching for silenced voices and hidden interactions in the text, searching for life-giving, non-traditional messages in the text, and always reading the text with the understanding that God desires your liberation. And ask yourself how this particular scripture can attribute to that. And so I'm going to now go into some tools that we use here at Sister Reach to do this very thing, is to address reproductive justice and religious resistance. And so one of the tools, is going to be a couple tools, and so one of the tools is self-help. And we call self-help testimony service. For those of us, particularly in the African-American church tradition, some of us grew up with testimony service, right? So you came in, during mid-service, midweek service, or Sunday morning service, before service got up, and somebody said, does anybody have a testimony to give? And so someone stood up and they shared, right, their struggles or their celebrations of what they were going through in order to not only encourage themselves, but encourage others. And it offers healing, practical advice to those going through trials, and to also encourage someone that they are not alone. This is often censored and led by the people, not necessarily led by leadership, and it allows others in the room to identify with their own struggles and triumphs. And not only that, it just creates a sense of community. And so the practice of self-help or testimony service, right, we use it as an assessment because you're able to see what the needs are in your community, in your church community, and so you can build ministry, build kind of justice ministry or outreach ministry based on what people are sharing from the pews in testimony service. And so that's how we use it as assessment. And then to use it as testimony service, we tell our stories for the purposes of acknowledging our own experience of human rights violation, humiliation, and exclusion. We validate each other's humanity and human experiences around human emotions around those violations. We begin to heal from the harm caused by the violations themselves, and then be healed from also the shame, the guilt, and other negative outcomes they produce. And then we are connecting individual lived experiences to community issues for the purposes of identifying our collective needs and organizing to address them through political or social activism. All right? And so that's how we use self-help. And so the next activity that we use is what we call standing in the stories. All right? And so standing in the stories can actually look different. And look like many and come off and be presented in many different ways for both groups and individuals, including Bible study. What we do here at Sister Reach is tailored for a particular Bible study or small group, but it can be also used when we're as preachers. And I know there was a call that touched on kind of sermon prep and preaching, but we can also use this as we're preparing for our Sunday morning or midweek sermon messages. And so Sister Reach we believe that this can be used to build habits of connecting to lived experiences, empathizing with the particularities of people's lives, and thinking outside the theological box about the lives of the marginalized who are often the ones in our pews. And so by creating a space for collective collaboration with each other and God toward the most positive outcomes for individuals, ministries, or justice initiatives that lead to a broader community and the group, self-help and testimony service can reveal the practical needs of community. And so using self-help in standing in the stories can also do that as well. All right? And so what we want to do in this activity is to cultivate empathy for people's stories through empathy with those sacred narratives. We give ourselves permission and support one another to what we call wrestling with the text or interrogating with the text, all right? And so also in this activity, we mine the text for narratives and or new readings of familiar narratives that lean toward justice. And finally, to stretch our relationship with the text from one that's prescriptive and stifling to one that is dialectic and generative. And so those are some of the goals with this particular activity. All right. And so this here is what we call dance between the stories. And so this is what happens in Standing in the Stories. And so you have a current event, all right? So you open with that, explain the current event, kind of have discussion around the current event. And then the facilitator, the pastor, rabbi, reverend, elder, whoever, whatever title was going by in your particular faith context, would decide the relationship order of the sacred text and the personal narrative. So you have a current event and then a text that kind of connects with that current event, and then including your personal stories. And so it's up to whoever's leading the Bible study, leading the small group, to kind of dance between this triangle that he sees. And so you can go back and forth as much as you need to kind of make what you're talking about kind of more, make it deeper, kind of, so people that can connect to it on a deeper level. And so at the end of this, you ask one last question. And so it allows you to imagine action responses to the text. And so the question would be, what would a God of justice ask of us in this situation within the sacred text? And so through this particular activity and approach, your communities will be encouraged to see themselves and their neighbors in the sacred text, respond to the connections they find between the text and the world around them, and begin to imagine actions that they are able to take to help create a better reality for themselves and for their communities. And so we do this activity in our curricula. We have two curriculums. We have Educate and Advocate. And they both have their own purposes, but they work together. And so the purposes of our Educate toolkit, we want to provide a foundational rationale for RJ as integral to all other justice work already happening inside the Christian church. I'll also offer our basic RJ training for those who want to learn more. Give strategies for introducing congregations to reproductive justice, and for some of our congregations, that could be a slow and steady process. And so this helps you to be able to have those conversations. And also, we want to offer preaching and teaching and messaging resources to those who are really prepared to do this work outside of the church. And so this particular training, the Educate toolkit, curriculum, is for clergy, seminarians, lay leaders who are really curious about reproductive justice and really are ready to learn more about RJ themselves, and who are seeking to open conversations around reproductive justice within the context of their church and their community. And then we offer the Advocate curricula. And so this particular one is for community organizers, advocates, activists who are ready to partner with faith communities and offer their insight and education through the reproductive justice. So this one is more or less for individuals who already have the framework of reproductive justice and they're wanting to organize with communities of faith. And so this particular toolkit or curriculum, we want to offer a foundational rationale, best practices, appropriate pre-considerations, and messaging for those seeking to organize or coach clergy and seminarians around reproductive justice issues and other social justice issues. And so that's what that's for. If you're interested in wanting to take a look at that or kind of get a taste of that, we can schedule a training or, or offer more information about this curricula and offering this curricula to your organizations or communities of faith. We also will have a bit of taste of this at our Reproductive Justice Summit, which Cantina is one of our speakers, along with a few other folks, with Dr. Will Gaffney as our keynote speaker for the day. And so I'll be here in Memphis, Tennessee, October 20th and 21st. If you want a taste of all that we talked about today in more depth and kind of more expansive view, then I would encourage you to visit our website, sisterreach.org, and register for this. I promise you it will be an informative time, a great time. And Memphis is just a great place to come. Besides, you know, the history, we have pretty amazing barbecue. So I would encourage you to do that as well. And so I want to, this is all that I have. So I want to offer this moment in time for any questions and, any questions or concerns or comments anyone wants to make.
Thank you so much, Essence. That was wonderful. So much information. You all are doing really great work. And I know that you've had some really great examples of what you've done with some congregations in Memphis, in and around Memphis, congregations that may be historically pretty conservative or conservative leaning. And you all have been able to go in there and do various Bible study series or workshops or other events. Can you talk about a little bit about how you've been able to sort of foster some of those relationships in places that on the surface might not look like they would even be open to this kind of conversation? How have you been able to forge those relationships with the clergy or leaders such that you get an opportunity to really go in and talk about the work that Sister Reach is doing and tailor it to that congregation? Because I know there might be people who are listening who are like, I don't know how to do this in my congregation. I'm feeling a little weird about it. I'm not sure if the people are ready for this. Tell me a little bit more about how Sister Reach has been able to be successful in that area.
So the main thing has been building relationships. I think that's the biggest thing for any justice movement. We have to be careful that we don't go into spaces just when we need clergy or when we need churches or when we feel like they should have the conversation, right? Like really build a relationship with individuals so that people understand and know who you are as an organizer, as a, you know, someone who's doing this work. Just really get to know who you are. And it's just having a lot of conversations to assess what the congregational needs are and if they even want this. And so I think going in with that viewpoint, that vantage point of, you know, just trying to not just push your beliefs or your view of this particular work on them, but really just building a relationship and just being of service to that particular congregation. I know here there are a lot of conservative congregations, and so some of those doors have been opened because we've had personal relationship with either the pastor or you know, someone on the leadership staff, that's able to kind of be an ally for us. And so I found in just being kind of ingrained in church culture my entire life, I understand that sometimes it's best to build allies. And then because the pastor may trust individuals in that congregation, they may be more apt to, you know, help you open the door. And so I think just building a rapport, a relationship with the people that are serving the congregation we're looking to go after goes a long way.
Great, thank you. One other question I had, if we don't have any other questions yet from people who are listening on the webinar, is to talk a little bit more about how you and Sister Reach do this work in interfaith contexts. I know that when we were at the Planned Parenthood event in DC in, when was that? Was that January, February, March? Earlier this March, okay. All of the months are starting to run together for me this year. It's been such a busy year. When Faye was talking about this work that you were doing, she talked about how even in non-Christian context, thinking about our relationship with the Bible and with sort of how Christianity, in many ways, or particular flavors of Christianity or interpretations of Christianity have used the Bible in harmful ways around issues of reproductive justice, and sort of how these, even if you're coming from a Christian lens, how these messages are translatable to non-Christian audiences like Jewish context or like Unitarian context. And so for benefit of the folks who are listening right now who may not work in a Christian context, we probably have some Jewish folks listening now, maybe even some Unitarian folks. Can you talk a little bit more about how Sister Reach both remains committed, or you as a Christian minister remain committed to your particular vocation as Christian minister, but also bringing in the experiences and the viewpoints of others who are not Christian?
Right. And so how we would do that, well, we have, and let me start here. Because what we do has been created because the kind of this political right has been deeply ingrained in Christian rhetoric that has been harmful. And so that's because that has been the case, that's where we've centered our work. And so my goal in this position is to continue to have those conversations with those who are not necessarily Christian, but they're Jewish, Muslim, Unitarianist, to how do we connect these principles to their faith context. And so Judaism, because of where it comes from, I have sort of an idea what that could be, and how we could do that, particularly using the Torah and the Old Testament, to be able to advocate for women, but really just sitting down and having conversations with folks about how this fit in their particular context. And so we'll be starting to do that soon, so that we can really expand and be, interfaith. But we've kind of been centering around Christians because that's just been the rhetoric that has been pushed. In our culture, in our how individuals, how policies are made, has come from this harmful kind of Christian context, unfortunately.
Right. I do think we have a question in the chat box, so let me see if I can find that question here. So we have a question from Jessica Williams, and she asks, do you all get pushback from religious communities? I'm trying to imagine taking this information to my conservative and religious family, but not sure how this would be taken. So this was you answered a little bit of this in your conversation around how you all forge these relationships with some of the more conservative Christian communities or conservative religious communities. So she's asking about imagining how she could take this information to her conservative and religious family, as well as religious community, but not sure how this would be taken. Do you have any examples where that it's worked, or where it hasn't, where you all have tried and maybe just haven't been able to make inroads in a particularly more conservative religious space, or even maybe you're still kind of working in some of those spaces to try to get in there?
Yes, so of course we are in the Tennessee period is the buckle of the Bible Belt, as we call it down here.
Yes.
And so I get pushback often. And so we have to keep in mind that introducing this and this kind of this dissonance of introducing and people taking on new information is slow and steady work, because they have to kind of unlearn what they've always learned and relearn or retake on
Yes.
or kind of embrace this new information. And so if you're trying to take it to someone who's more conservative, you're going to get pushback. That's inevitable. Because people feel as passionately about how they feel as we feel about this work. And so you're going to get pushback, but just being patient and being gracious in the moment that people are really, for those that want to take on and learn this new information and want to take this vantage point this more progressive vantage point of how we view the Bible and biblical text, and having see people in the scriptures. For those that would like to do that, then just being patient as they relearn what this means. But then for those who really don't want the information and they are dead set of staying where they are, I don't know that there's much we can do, because I know at Sister Reach, while we do have some conservative churches, most of our kind of things that we go after, especially with the toolkits, is for more moderate to progressive, because the harm that comes from oftentimes from conservative churches. And so just be patient as people are learning and relearning the new information. But just know you're going to get a lot of pushback, because people are you're challenging everything that they have believed up until this point.
Right. And that's scary. And that is scary for people.
Very scary.
And speaking of,
I hope I answered your question.
Jessica, if you're still listening and you still have another or an additional question, please put it in the chat box, and we will try to get an answer to that. I appreciate you bringing up the landscape there in Memphis and in Tennessee in general, because I had written a question here or just a note here as I was listening to your presentation about what it means to be doing state-specific work, particularly in the South. I'm not sure who we have listening to us today and their geographic orientation, but we certainly, in terms of folks who RSVP, have people all over the country. And I know that you all have been doing great work in Tennessee, which is a very interesting place, as you've already talked about, to be trying to do this work and to be doing this work in general in the South and some of the more what might be considered conservative areas. But we may also have people that don't necessarily live in the South, but may live in rural areas or even urban areas that are a bit more conservative leaning, for lack of a better term. Do you have some best practices that you all have employed in Tennessee, just in the experience that you all have had over the years that you've been there, that you think are just transferable across the board for other kind of geographic, for people that may be like, I am in the middle of blah, blah, blah state, and it's a red state, and nobody's I don't feel like anybody will listen to me, particularly around the lobbying and the advocacy work that you all are doing?
Right. So some of the things that we're doing, because we're in Tennessee and it is so heavily Christian-based, a lot of our advocacy work has taken place in the spaces of churches, because we know church folks are voters. Mm-hmm. And so we specifically, as a part of our strategy, is including churches and spaces of faith in our advocacy work, and as we're going around. As a matter of fact, a few years ago, we did something around Amendment 1, which is, I believe, a fetal assault law. And so a lot of their strategy, then, this was me before I got to Sister Reach, a lot of their strategy was to do kind of have community conversations in spaces of faith in churches, because if you're like Memphis, there's a church on every corner, and so those are kind of the life of our community. And so just going there and also employing and connecting how this resonates or how this connects to our faith. For a lot of people here, as I said in the presentation, you can't talk about some of these issues without talking about faith, because it's literally their livelihood or our livelihood. And so just being mindful of that, and continue to build relationships with those in the community who are on the ground, some of the people there who are working and who are kind of lobbying, getting allies on your side to be able to do the work and be able to, lobby and push for change as far as statewide. I know that has been successful in some of our comprehensive sex ed work that we do here to try to get the laws changed to be able to offer comprehensive sex ed in our schools. That has been as well, in addition to Amendment 1, that has been kind of where, things have been successful.
Great. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. I loved the graphic that you showed towards the end, where you had the current event at the top in the box there with the sacred text and with the personal story sort of branches coming out from that, and for clergy or leaders who are doing Bible studies or small groups to use that as a framework. What have you been seeing or hearing, particularly in the last few months, around this issue with the ACA, proposed ACA repeal, the defunding of Planned Parenthood, et cetera? What have you been hearing, you know, in the congregations when you've been talking to clergy and people within their congregations around this current event, which was much of which was the catalyst for us doing this webinar series, and how people have or have not been making that connection between their own personal experience with repro justice and healthcare and the sacred text, or not?
A lot of the conversation that I've had over the last few months have kind of been personal conversations, because I have friends that, you know, we talk about justice issues. And so it has been an eye-opening experience, right, to be able to connect the biblical text or connect the Bible to this issue and have people see how, you know, this is not just about health care or, you know, certain people having it or not, but it's about the well-being of those around us. It's not so much that I have to pay more, I have to do more, but the sense of everybody deserves to be well. Just like the woman with the issue of blood who ran after Jesus deserved to be well. Just like, you know, so many other women who's had infirmities deserve to live full life, and the healing that they received in that story is the same way that we should treat and we should kind of interact with each other in that regard. And so being able to see that kind of connection has just been very much so mind-boggling. That's just, yeah.
That's great. Let's see if we have any other questions here. Okay, so we do have a question here. Does Essence have any stories of where these curricula and where Sister Reach's approach has made an impact? How has it made a difference to congregations? And an additional question on top of that, what advice would you give to religious leaders who are more progressive than maybe the people in the pews on these issues and are afraid to broach this conversation in fear of pushback for the members of their community? But let's start with that first question. Success stories, where your curricula has made an impact. I know that we talked about a few of those at the Planned Parenthood gathering in March for a couple of the churches there, but if you could share a couple of success stories.
Yeah, so we've seen where, so this curricula is kind of a culmination of what my predecessor, Reverend Faye London, had been working on. She had been with Sister Reach since 2013, 2014. So the last 3 or 4 years, and how she's organized it. So these curricula is kind of the culmination of that. And so just the success that we've seen over the years. I know one particular church here that I had the opportunity to table at. It is a Kojic church, and Kojic churches are more conservative, and so the pastor looks forward to us coming every year on the table, offering our resources, and we do safe-sex kits, and he lets us keep safe-sex kits at the church, you know, and then which opens the door to say, hey, let's do, you know, and the reproductive justice, you know, so that opens the door for us to have more conversation, because he understands and know what we do and realizes that that's important. Also, just to continue, you know, with our youth ambassadors, we do the same work. We're training youth. And so they have the opportunity to learn how to advocate for themselves and their needs, because there are so many people speaking on behalf of our teams that their voices are silenced. And so this particular program, our approach to building up kind of future leaders coming behind us, has been successful. They've been to Nashville and been to the Capitol and been able to learn how to speak to lawmakers about what their needs are, and really, you know, lifting up their leadership, which is what Sister Reach and Reproductive Justice is about, is lifting up the leadership of not only just women, but, you know, all marginalized communities and so and individuals. And so we allow our youth to do that, to be able to do that. And then so the second question, what advice do you give to religious leaders who are more progressive? So I see this in my personal context. The church I go to, I have a very progressive pastor, and I have a moderate at best, because they love my pastor type of situation. And so because they love and trust my pastor, and they love her, and they trust her, and they see her working around the country, she's able to have more conversations from the pulpit in the church because of that trust that it has built. And so I would say, just looking at her example, just build trust and build relationship. That's where a lot of this comes from, because this information is so impacting, and it's so kind of sensitive to the touch. And so we want to be mindful of trying to, you know, get people to come to, you know, from kind of this moderate to progressive, or you know, kind of close, being a little conservative but being close to moderate, try to get them to more progressive issues, that there has to be a level of trust and relationship built. And that's what all culture change work, right? Like, you can't just go and say what you've been doing is wrong, and we can't do that. Like, that's not acceptable. And so just build relationship, and people get to know what you're doing and who you are, and just begin to introduce these topics and things kind of over time and slow, and give people the opportunity to change and kind of reorient their minds of what they've been doing.
I think that that's so key when you talk about the people trusting their clergy, so that even if you are in, like you said, a more moderate overall congregational context, that if the pastor does, particularly in Black church context, I think if people trust their pastor and trust her, I'll use her to privilege women here, her leadership, that they are more, I think, apt and willing sometimes to think a little bit more deeply about some of these topics, or to even move a little bit. I was in a conversation yesterday with some other folks who were doing work around RJ, and one of the things that we walked away sort of reminding ourselves is that we're not going to necessarily move people or see people move from A to Z. But if we can get folks to move from A to C or D incrementally, particularly people who might be more on the moderate leaning kind of side of things, that too is a victory. And I don't mean a victory in the sense that this is a game that we're playing, but it is evidence that there has been some movement, and that there has been some change in thought, and some broadening of theological kind of inquiry. And so I think.
I was gonna say, I think the idea just to get people moving.
Yes.
Is the biggest hurdle. Mm-hmm. Once they're moving, they're going to get the point B, C, D, E, F, M, N, O, P, right? Mm-hmm. They're going to get there, but the idea is to get them moving. And Absolutely. So that's what we hope to do, is get them moving and get them thinking towards a more holistic, kind of humanistic approach to looking at this and how we do this work.
That's great. Well, in our final few moments here, if you have any sort of parting words, so people are watching this, they're thinking about sermon series or Bible study curriculum for the fall, or small groups, and they're planning, the pastors and rabbis and other religious leaders are furiously planning for September and beyond. What are some things that you would leave them with as they are thinking forward to continuing to keep the momentum of keeping RJ at the center of our concern in our congregational context?
So I would say some last parting words would be to continue to push and move forward. I know we're kind of fearful of pushback, but I would be a little skeptical if we didn't receive pushback, because that's people trying to reappropriate what we're teaching them in the scope of their lives and their faith. And so I would just say, just to keep move forward, and don't be afraid of the pushback. Don't be afraid of the challenge. Just keep moving forward, and the idea is to get people moving. And so if you can get them moving, you're doing good. you're doing good, and they're moving towards the right direction. And so, yeah, just keep moving forward and don't be fearful of pushback.
Great. And finally, anything interesting or exciting coming up for Sister Reach that you want to share, or tell us a little bit more about this for the people that may have joined late for the panel and the summit that's coming up in October?
Yes, so we have our Reproductive Justice Summit 2017 coming up. We just released registration yesterday. Thank you, Lord.
Can you share it? Do you have the photo handy? Can you share the screen of that?
I can. Give me just
okay.
A second. There we go.
Great.
Okay. All right, so we have our Reproductive Justice Summit taking place Friday and Saturday, October the 20th and the 21st. Registration is currently at a reduced rate at this moment, and it will go up September 1st. So if you want that reduced rate, I would suggest that you register today. Register as soon as possible because September 1, the rates do go up. But we will have an opening reception and panel Friday evening. Saturday, we have our summit, which is all day. Registration starts at 8, summit begins at 9. We have our lovely facilitator, host of this call, Ms. Contina Washington-Leapart, along with Ms. Naomi, who will be doing a summit, a portion together around queering RJ. We have somebody coming from Columbia Law, named Kira Shepherd, and then our own Orisha Bowers, who's a dancing mindfulness facilitator, also who is currently just took a position a month ago as our program director. And so she'll be there along with, like I said, we'll be doing some tastes of this toolkit throughout the day. And then we cannot forget the Reverend Dr. Will Gaffney, who is a womanist theologian. She's also Associate Professor of Hebrew Bible at Wright Divinity in Fort Worth, and she's an Episcopal priest as well. So she'll be our keynote speaker. All of our events are held at St. John's Parish Life Center, which is literally over near the University of Memphis. And so please, if you'd like more information, you can go to our website, sisterreach.org, to get that. Yeah, we hope to have a great time. Also, you get hotel information. All of that will be made available. It's made available on our website. And so feel free to go ahead and register. And if you have any questions, you can always reach out to me via Twitter as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Essence. I'm so grateful that we were able to get our schedules working together and do this last installment of our webinar series. And we're hoping for those of you that are watching, we are on plan to compile everything that we've done in the 4 webinars this summer, all of the materials, the recorded webinars themselves, resources that some of the participants or the facilitators have offered to us, etc. Hopefully getting those onto a website and into a toolkit so you can easily just click on a particular website and find that information and utilize that as you are planning forward in your congregations for the remainder of this summer as well as into the fall. And so we are so grateful for everyone who has supported this project, which has been a wonderful labor of love for all of us involved. And we're grateful particularly for all of the facilitators, especially those who are working in sister organizations like Sister Reach, who we get wonderful opportunities to collaborate with doing this great work. And so we will continue the resistance. It is not over. We have to continue the long game and the marathon that it is to reclaim the narrative that people of faith are interested and are that this is important to all of us, no matter what our particular faith tradition is. So thank you for joining us today, and check us out on Twitter for the live tweets if you did not get a chance to see them, and we will see you next time. Thanks, Essence.
No problem. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.